My name is Rachel Voss. I'm 34 years old, and I've been a licensed notary signing agent in Franklin County, Ohio for 11 years. I don't just notarize documents. I train new notaries for the state certification board twice a year. Every notary in a 50-mile radius either took my class or knows someone who did. On March 3, 2024, at 4:47 p.m., my phone rang. It was Diane Kessler, a notary I'd trained back in 2019. Her voice was tight. "Rachel," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you sign a quitclaim deed for your father's house on Maple Crest Drive this afternoon?" I was standing in my kitchen in Westerville, Ohio, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. My father, Walter Voss, had died 7 weeks before. I hadn't set foot near a courthouse, a title office, or a notary's desk in all that time. "No," I said. "I didn't sign anything." "Why?" "Because someone did," Diane said. "Someone came into my office at 2:15 today with a woman who had your ID or name and a signature that matched samples she brought with her. She said she was you." I set the mug down very carefully on the counter. "Diane," I said, "tell me exactly who was in your office." That's where this starts. But to understand how my sister thought she could get away with this, you need to understand the 11 years before it, and the exact moment I realized her signature wasn't the only thing that had been forged. By the time this story ends, my sister will have signed her name to a deed that destroyed her financially, emotionally, and legally, and she never once suspected that the person who caught her wasn't a detective, wasn't a lawyer, but was a woman who had spent over a decade teaching notaries exactly what a forged signature looks like under a loupe. She thought she'd found the perfect crack in the system. She hadn't accounted for the fact that the system had been built in that county, partly by me. I'm not going to tell you yet what happened after that phone call. I'll tell you this much. 6 weeks later, my sister sat across from a table with 2 attorneys, a state investigator, and a folder I had built by myself at my own kitchen table at 11 p.m. on weeknights, without her ever knowing. If you want to see exactly how a forged deed unravels a family, and how quiet, patient documentation beats screaming and lawsuits, hit subscribe, because this channel does one of these every week. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is where you're watching from. I read everyone. Now let me take you back to where this actually started, not 7 weeks before that phone call, but almost 30 years before it. Let me take you back to the summer of 1996 when I was 6 years old and my sister Melissa was 9. I grew up in a modest brick house on Maple Crest Drive in Westerville, Ohio, the same house that 28 years later would become the center of this entire story. My father, Walter Voss, worked 31 years as a machinist at a plant in Columbus. My mother, Carol, was a homemaker who did the books for 2 local small businesses on the side. We were not wealthy. We were the kind of family that put money into a coffee can before we ever heard the word budget. Melissa was the older sister, and from the earliest age I can remember, the dynamic between us was set by our parents in a way that I don't think they ever examined. Melissa was praised for being clever. I was praised for being careful. Melissa got away with things because she meant well. I got blamed for things because I should have known better, even when I hadn't done anything. Here's an early example, one that seems small now, but that I think about constantly. In 1998, when I was 8, Melissa took $11 from my mother's purse to buy a Tamagotchi at the drugstore. When my mother noticed the money missing, Melissa said she saw me near the purse. I was grounded for 2 weeks. Melissa never confessed. My mother found out the truth 4 months later when Melissa bragged about it to a friend on our porch, loudly enough for my mother to hear through the screen door. My punishment was never reversed. Nobody apologized. My mother just said, "Well, you shouldn't have been near the purse either." I share that story because it is the first thread in a rope that would eventually become a hanging offense for our entire family 30 years later. Melissa learned at age 9 that taking what wasn't hers and then pointing at someone else worked. I learned at age 8 that documentation and proof didn't matter if the people judging you had already decided who you were. That second lesson is the one that shaped my entire career. I was good at math and detail work from a young age. In high school, I worked part-time at a title insurance company in Westerville, filing documents and learning the back office of real estate transactions before I even had a driver's license good for more than a learner's permit. I liked the precision of it. A deed either has the right legal description or it doesn't. A signature either matches the exemplar on file or it doesn't. There was no ambiguity, no family politics, no, well, you should have known better. Just facts, ink, and law. I got my notary commission in Ohio in 2013 at age 23 while I was working as an escrow assistant. By 2015, I was doing loan signings full-time as a notary signing agent, the person who sits across from buyers and sellers at closing and watches them sign 40-plus pages of legal documents, verifying identity against government-issued ID, checking signatures against what's on file, and administering oaths where needed. In 2019, the Ohio Secretary of State's approved education vendor asked me to start teaching the state-mandated notary education course. Since then, I've personally trained more than 600 notaries across central Ohio, including, as it turned out, Diane Kessler, the woman who called me on March 3, 2024. My father was proud of this. He used to introduce me at family gatherings as my daughter, the one people trust with their signatures. He said it like a joke, but I could tell he meant it. My mother died of ovarian cancer in 2011 when I was 21 and Melissa was 24. After that, my father lived alone in the house on Maple Crest Drive for 13 years. Melissa's path looked different from mine, though not in ways anyone flagged as alarming at the time. She went to Ohio University, dropped out after 2 years, worked a string of retail management jobs, married a man named Todd Renner in 2010, divorced him in 2015, and by 2016 was working intermittently as a leasing agent for a property management company in Dublin, Ohio. She had 2 kids, ages 13 and 10 by the time of this story, Aiden and Sophie. She struggled financially. My father, and later I, both helped her more than either of us should have, though I didn't fully understand how much and much later. Here's an early warning sign I want to flag, because at the time I dismissed it as ordinary sibling stuff. In 2017, my father co-signed a $6,200 used car loan for Melissa. Within 8 months, Melissa was 2 payments behind, and my father quietly covered $1,840 to bring the loan current without telling me. I only found out because I noticed a withdrawal on his bank statement when I was helping him set up online banking that October. When I asked him about it, he said, "Don't make a thing of it, Rachel. She's your sister." I let it go. I didn't yet understand that "don't make a thing of it" was a phrase I would hear in different forms for the next 7 years, every single time Melissa did something that should have been a thing. By 2019, my father's health had started to decline. Nothing dramatic yet, just early-stage type 2 diabetes and the beginnings of what would later be diagnosed as mild cognitive impairment in 2021. I started driving to Maple Crest Drive most Sundays to check on him, do his grocery run, and help with paperwork. Melissa visited less consistently, birthdays, Christmas, and the occasional Sunday when she needed something. I don't say that to score points. I say it because it created an information asymmetry that Melissa would later exploit almost perfectly. I knew our father's finances, his house, his habits, and his documents in granular detail. Melissa knew far less, but she knew enough to know that I knew things, and I believe now, looking back, that this made her resentful in a way she never said out loud until the very end. One more thing happened in this period that I need you to remember, because it becomes important later. In 2020, my father had his will updated at a local estate attorney's office, a firm called Hargrove and Lynn, on State Street in Columbus. The will left the house at Maple Crest Drive to be split 50-50ths between Melissa and me upon his death, with a specific clause naming me as executor, since I was, in my father's words on the signature day, the one who reads the fine print. I remember Melissa was in the room for the reading of that clause. I remember the look on her face, not anger, not visibly anyway, but something flatter, more calculating. At the time I told myself I imagined it. I didn't imagine it. I know that now. By early 2023, my father's cognitive decline had worsened enough that he needed help managing bills and eventually help understanding what he was signing. I did not have power of attorney at that point. He was still deemed competent by his physician, Dr. Anita Suresh, but he needed guidance. I started attending his medical appointments. Melissa did not. When I brought this up once, gently, at a Sunday dinner in June 2023, Melissa said the sentence that would become the motif of this entire story. The one she would repeat, almost verbatim, 3 separate times over the following year. "You always think you're the only one who does anything for this family." I said nothing back that first time. I just noted it, the way I note discrepancies in a signature quietly and for later. My father died on January 14, 2024, of a sudden cardiac event, At age 68, he was found by a neighbor, Gary Hutchins, who noticed the newspapers piling up on the porch for 2 days. I got the call at 9:14 a.m. while I was at a closing in Dublin. I left mid-signing, which I had never done in 11 years of this job, and drove straight to Maple Crest Drive. The house, the one Melissa would try to sell out from under me 7 weeks later, was, at that moment, still just a house full of my father's things: his recliner, his half-finished crossword on the kitchen table, and a coffee mug in the sink that neither of us touched for 11 days because neither of us could bring ourselves to wash it. That's where the real story begins. My father's funeral was on January 20th, 2024, at Schrodinger Funeral Home on North High Street in Columbus. 211 people signed the guest book. I know the exact number because I counted the pages later, out of the kind of nervous precision that has always been my coping mechanism. Melissa gave the eulogy. She cried, genuinely. I believe. Grief is not something I doubt in her, even now. But 3 days after the funeral, on January 23rd at 6:40 p.m., she called me and said, "We need to talk about the house before this drags out forever." I told her I understood, that Hargrove and Lynn had the will on file, that as executor I would need to open probate, and that probate in Franklin County typically takes 6 to 12 months before a house can be legally transferred or sold, especially with 2 beneficiaries. Melissa's response was, 6 months? Rachel, I can't wait 6 months. Todd's behind on child support again, and I've got Aiden's orthodontist bill, and I owe my landlord back rent from December. I want to be clear here, because I think it matters for understanding what came next. Melissa's financial distress was real. I don't believe she was lying about being behind on rent or the orthodontist bill. What I believe, and what the evidence would later prove, is that being genuinely desperate does not make forging your sister's name to a deed a forgivable act. It makes it an explicable one. Those are different things, and I want to hold both. On January 29th, I filed the will for probate with the Franklin County Probate Court. Case number 2024 PR000847. I have that number memorized the way some people memorize a childhood phone number. As executor, I was required to file an inventory of the estate within 3 months, notify creditors, and eventually seek approval to distribute or sell estate property. I explained all of this to Melissa over the phone that same evening. She said, "Fine, whatever the lawyer says." Her tone was clipped. I noted it. I always note tone changes. It's part of what I do professionally. The words people say when they're planning something rarely match the words they say when they're not. On February 4th, Melissa asked me over text, "Has probate opened yet? How long does the whole thing take, start to finish, worst case?" I told her worst case, with no complications, 8 to 10 months. She responded with a single thumbs up emoji. I remember finding that strange, too calm, too final. For someone who 3 weeks earlier had been in tears over a $340 orthodontist bill. On February 12th, I drove to Maple Crest Drive to begin the estate inventory the court required, going room by room, documenting furniture, appliances, my father's tools, and the handful of items with any real value, including a 2011 Ford F-150 worth roughly $9,200 and a modest retirement account with Fidelity worth $61,400, which under his will was to be split evenly between Melissa and me outside of probate, since it had named beneficiaries. When I arrived, I noticed the lockbox on my father's desk, where he kept the deed copy. His passport and other core documents was slightly out of place. Not missing. Just moved, maybe 2 inches, in a way that only someone who had inventoried that desk a dozen times over the prior year would notice. I didn't think much of it that day. I flagged it mentally and moved on, the way you flag a signature that looks 90% right, but not 100%. On February 19th, Melissa called and asked to grab coffee, just us. We met at a Bob Evans on Route 161. She told me she'd found a real estate agent, a woman named Kristen Pauley from a firm called Buckeye Realty Group, and that Kristen had told her the Maple Crest house could list for around $289,000 in the current market. "I think we should just sell it fast," Melissa said. "Get an offer, split it, move on. I can't keep driving past that house every week like it's some kind of shrine." I told her, again, that we couldn't legally list or sell the house until probate granted authority, either through the will's executor powers, which typically still require court approval for real estate sales in Ohio unless the will grants specific independent administration authority, which ours did not clearly specify, or through a court-approved sale. I told her I'd checked with our attorney, David Okafor at Hargrove and Lynn, and he'd confirmed we were looking at a minimum of 4 more months before any sale could even be listed, let alone closed. Melissa's face changed. Just slightly. She said, 4 more months, very quietly, like she was doing math in her head that had nothing to do with grief. Here's where I need you to subscribe and drop a comment with your city and local time, because what happens next is the part where most people watching this would have missed the warning sign entirely, and I almost did too. On March 1st, 2024, 2 days before Diane Kessler's phone call, I got a strange notification from my bank's fraud alert system. Someone had run a soft credit pull using my social security number through a service called SmartCheck ID Verify, commonly used by title companies and real estate agents to verify identity before closing. I didn't think much of it in the moment. I assumed it was related to probate paperwork, maybe something David Okafor's office had run. I texted David to ask. He said his office hadn't requested any credit pull on me. That should have been the moment I understood everything. Instead, I filed it away as probably a mistake, follow up Monday, and went back to my week's closings. That Monday was March 4th. The day before that, March 3rd at 4:47 p.m., is when Diane Kessler called. Diane told me that at 2:15 p.m. that day, a woman had come into her mobile notary office in Gahanna, Ohio, claiming to be Rachel Voss, presenting a document that Diane described as a quitclaim deed transferring sole ownership of the Maple Crest Drive property from the estate of Walter Voss by Rachel Voss and Melissa Renner. Grantors to Melissa Renner alone as grantee, with an accompanying note that Rachel Voss had signed a limited power of attorney authorizing Melissa to complete the sale on her behalf. I asked Diane what the woman looked like. She described a woman roughly 5'6", brown hair, mid-30s, presenting a driver's license with my name and my date of birth, June 11, 1990, and a photo that Diane said didn't look exactly like you. But I wasn't sure since I only met you a couple times at the training seminars. I asked her the single most important question. Diane, did you notarize it? She said, "That's why I'm calling you, Rachel." Something felt off, so I told her I needed to verify the ID number against the state database before I could complete the notarization. And I said I'd call her back within the hour to finish it. I ran the license number. It came back as a duplicate flagged, associated with a fraud report from a bank 3 days ago. And then I remembered you'd trained me and I had your cell number from the class roster. So I called you instead of her. That is the exact moment the story turns. Not because I got angry. I want to be honest, my first reaction wasn't rage. It was a kind of cold, focused clarity. The same feeling I get when I catch a discrepancy on a closing. Document seconds before a client signs something that would cost them thousands. I asked Diane 3 things calmly. Could she keep the unexecuted document and not notarize anything? Could she give me the exact timestamp and any names used, and would she be willing to put what she'd told me in a written statement if it came to that? She said yes to all 3. I hung up the phone at 4:58 p.m. I did not call Melissa. I did not text her. I sat at my kitchen table, and for the first time in this entire process, I stopped being a grieving daughter managing an estate, and I became professionally and completely a document examiner investigating a fraud committed by my own sister. I want to walk you through the next 6 weeks in order, because the way I built this case matters as much as the confrontation itself. On March 4th, the morning after Diane's call, I did not sleep much. At 7:30 a.m., I called David Okafor at Hargrove and Lynn and told him everything Diane had described. David's tone shifted immediately from a state attorney calm to something sharper. He said, "Rachel, what you're describing is forgery and attempted fraudulent conveyance of estate property. And depending on how it's charged, potentially identity theft under Ohio Revised Code 2913-49. I need you to not confront your sister yet. I need you to document everything first, because the moment you tip her off, she has time to destroy evidence or change her story." That instruction, document first, confront later, became the spine of the next 6 weeks. On March 5th, I drove to Diane Kessler's office in Gahanna in person. She had, as promised, kept the unexecuted quitclaim deed in a folder without notarizing it. I photographed every page with my phone, front and back, and asked Diane to write a dated, signed statement describing the appointment, the time the woman arrived, 2:15 p.m. The ID presented an Ohio driver's license number ending in 4471, which was not my actual license number, ending in 2289. And the specific words the woman used when Diane hesitated. According to Diane's statement, when she said she needed to verify the ID first, the woman said, "That's fine, but I'm in kind of a rush. My sister's a notary too. She trained half the county, so I know how this works." That detail matters because it told me my sister had used my own professional reputation as a prop to make herself look credible, while simultaneously stealing my identity to do it. On March 6th, I obtained a certified copy of my own driver's license history from the Ohio BMV and confirmed that no license had ever been issued to me under the number ending in 4471. I also pulled my credit report and found, in addition to the Smart Check soft pull from March 1st, a hard inquiry from a payday-adjacent lender called QuickBridge Capital, dated February 26, 2024, for a $4,000 loan application using my Social Security number. The loan had been denied, according to the report, due to insufficient verified income matching the applicant profile, meaning whoever applied hadn't been able to produce pay stubs matching my actual income, which was a small mercy because it meant the fraud hadn't succeeded there. But it told me this wasn't a single impulsive act. This was at minimum a 10-day-old plan by February 26th, possibly older. On March 8th, I went back through my father's house with fresh eyes. Focused now on that slightly shifted lockbox from February 12th, I found that the original recorded deed to the house, document I had photographed for the estate inventory back in January, showing both my father's name and, after 2016 refinance, both Melissa's and my names as contingent remainder beneficiaries in a transfer on death designation my father had set up with an attorney at the time, was missing from the folder. In its place was a photocopy, not the original. I remembered clearly photographing the original in January. I had the photo, time-stamped January 29th at 11:14 a.m. on my phone. Someone had removed the original between January 29th and March 8th. I could not prove yet who. I suspected I already knew. On March 11th, I did something I want other people in similar situations to consider. I did not accuse Melissa. Instead, I called her casually and asked how she was doing, and mentioned in passing, "Hey, has anyone from the title company or a notary reached out to you about the house?" I got a weird call from my bank about a credit check. I said it lightly, almost like small talk. Melissa's response was a beat too fast. "No, why would they call me? I haven't done anything with the house." I said, "Oh, weird, okay," and let it go. I want to flag something here for anyone watching who is in a similar position. The ability to stay calm and unrevealing on that call was, without exaggeration, the single hardest thing I did in this entire process. But it worked. She had no idea I already had Diane's statement, the fake ID number, and evidence of a missing original deed. On March 14th, I met with David Okafor again, and we discussed next steps. He advised that since no notarization had actually been completed, thanks to Diane's caution, the quitclaim deed itself had no legal force, but that the attempted forgery, the fraudulent ID, and the unauthorized credit applications constituted enough for both a criminal referral and a strong civil claim if Melissa tried again through a different notary. David suggested we needed to determine whether Melissa had approached other notaries before Diane in case she'd try elsewhere. This is the part of the investigation where my professional network became the actual mechanism of the reversal, not just a backstory detail. I want you to subscribe right now if you haven't, because the next part is where everything I'd built over 11 years of training notaries across this county came together in a way I could never have planned for, and it's the part people ask me about most when they message me after these videos. On March 15th, I sent a discreet professional email, not an accusation, just a heads up, to the roughly 40 notaries I'd personally certified within a 20-mile radius of Westerville and Gahanna. Framed as a general fraud awareness alert, I've become aware of an attempted identity fraud involving a forged ID and a family estate matter. If anyone contacts you for a same-day notarization on a quitclaim deed for a property on Maple Crest Drive, Westerville, please contact me directly before proceeding. I did not name Melissa. I did not need to. On March 19th, I received a response from a notary named Priya Anand in Dublin. Ohio, who I'd trained in 2021. She said a woman matching my description, attempting to use my name, had come to her office on March 9th, 6 days before my email, and had actually succeeded in getting a document notarized. Not the deed itself, but a separate limited power of attorney form, supposedly authorizing Melissa Renner to act on behalf of Rachel Voss in all matters related to the sale of real property located at 4417 Maple Crest Drive, Westerville, Ohio. Priya had notarized it because the ID presented that day, a different fake license number ending in 7702, had, according to Priya's notes, looked convincing enough, and Priya hadn't yet seen my fraud alert email since it hadn't been sent yet. This was the discovery moment. This was the piece that told me the scope wasn't a single failed attempt at Diane's office. It was a second successful forgery, a real notarized power of attorney document with my forged signature and a fake ID in my name. My mime, dated March 9th, sitting somewhere, potentially already in the hands of a title company or buyer. I called Priya immediately and asked if she knew where the document had gone after notarization. She said the woman told her it was for the title company to hold on file for closing. I asked which title company. Priya remembered the woman mentioning a name, Heartland Title and Escrow, in Dublin. On March 20th, I called Heartland Title and Escrow, using my professional credentials, not deception, but simply identifying myself accurately as a licensed notary signing agent and the actual property co-owner, and asking whether they had a pending file for 4417 Maple Crest Drive. The escrow officer, a man named Curtis Boyle, confirmed there was an open file and that a buyer had already made an offer, $278,500, from a young couple named the Whitfields, with a closing date targeted for April 15, 2024. Melissa, using the forged power of attorney, had listed and put the house under contract in under 3 weeks, entirely without my knowledge, entirely without court approval for the estate to sell, and entirely on the strength of a document with my forged signature and a fake ID bearing my name. I asked Curtis not to proceed with anything further and told him I needed 48 hours before I could explain fully, given it involved an active fraud investigation. He agreed to place an internal hold on the file. That was the full scope of the discovery. My sister had not just attempted forgery once. She had succeeded once on March 9th using a fake ID and a cooperating, unwittingly notary, had listed the estate house without court authority, had gotten it under contract with a real buyer, and had a closing date exactly 3 weeks away. If I hadn't caught it, on April 15th, 2024, my sister would have received the majority of $278,500 in proceeds from a house she did not have the legal right to sell alone, using my forged signature to do it. I now had, as of March 20th, Diane's written statement and the unexecuted first deed attempt. The fake ID numbers from 2 separate attempts, neither matching my real license. Priya's notarized power of attorney with my forged signature. Confirmation from Heartland Title and Escrow of an active purchase contract. And a missing original deed from my father's house. I had built this entire file without Melissa knowing a single thing had gone wrong for her. I now needed to decide what to do with it, and I needed to do it quietly and precisely the way I'd been trained to do everything else in my career. Between March 20th and April 8th, I worked with David Okafor to build what he called a clean, closable file, meaning something a prosecutor and a civil court could act on without ambiguity, and something that would stop the April 15th closing before it happened. The first thing we did was legal, not emotional. On March 22nd, David filed an emergency motion with the Franklin County Probate Court to formally restrict any transfer of the Maple Crest Drive property pending investigation, citing the estate's transfer on death designation and the lack of court-approved authority for a sale. The court granted a temporary restraining order on the property on March 26th, which meant that even if I did nothing else, the April 15th closing legally could not proceed. I want to note something here for anyone in a similar position. Getting this legal stop in place before confronting Melissa was, in David's words, the single most important step because it removed the financial urgency that might otherwise have pushed Melissa to accelerate or panic sell through some other channel. Once the TRO was filed, the clock stopped. I could move at my own pace. The second thing I did was documentary. Between March 27th and April 2nd, I compiled everything into a single binder physical, not just digital, Because I've learned in 11 years of closings that people believe paper in a way they don't believe a phone screen. I organized it exactly the way I'd train a new notary to organize a fraud file. Chronological tab dividers, a summary cover sheet, and every underlying document behind it. Tab 1, Diane Kessler's statement and the unexecuted deed. Tab 2, Priya Anand's statement and the notarized power of attorney with the forged signature, which I had a certified copy of directly from Priya's notary journal, a journal entry that, under Ohio law, every notary is required to keep, listing the date, the document type, the ID presented, and a thumbprint if required, which in Priya's case, thankfully she had taken since it was a POA involving real property. That thumbprint would later matter enormously. Tab 3, the BMV confirmation that no license had ever been issued to me under either fake ID number. Tab 4, the Heartland title and escrow file summary from Curtis Boyle, confirming the purchase contract and the targeted closing date. Tab 5, the credit report showing the Smart Check pull and the QuickBridge Capital loan application, both unauthorized. Tab 6, photographs of the missing original deed, with timestamps proving it existed in my father's lockbox as of January 29th and was gone by March 8th. On March 30th, I did something I debated for 2 days before doing. I drove to the Dublin branch of Heartland Title and Escrow in person and asked to see the physical power of attorney document Melissa had submitted, the one bearing my forged signature. Curtis allowed me to view it under the file hold since I was a named party on the document, even fraudulently. I studied that signature for 11 minutes. I want to explain what I was looking at because this is where my professional training became the actual, literal mechanism of the reversal, not just a poetic parallel. A forged signature almost never fails because it looks wrong to an untrained eye. It fails because of pen pressure and stroke sequencing that a forger, working from a printed sample rather than years of muscle memory, cannot replicate. My real signature, which I have executed probably 40,000 times across 11 years of closing, starts with a distinctive upward flick on the capital R, then a fast, low, connected cursive through ACL and a downward, slightly detached final stroke on the S in Voss, a habit from years of signing loan documents quickly. The forged signature on that power of attorney had the R correct, almost photographically correct, clearly traced or closely copied from something. But the final S in Voss was fully connected to the rest of the word, with no detachment, no hesitation. It's a tiny thing. It would mean nothing to almost anyone. It meant everything to me because I could point to 11 years of loan documents, filed with title companies across the county, all showing that same detached final stroke, as an exemplar record that a forensic document examiner could compare against this forged signature in about 10 minutes. I photographed the signature with Curtis's permission for the file. Tab 7. On April 2nd, David and I met with a detective from the Westerville Division of Police, Detective Mara Ionescu, who worked financial crimes. I brought the binder. She went through it methodically, and about halfway through Tab 2, she looked up and said, "This is one of the more complete fraud files I've seen walk in here without us having to build it ourselves." She confirmed that what Melissa had done met the elements of forgery under Ohio Revised Code 2913, 31 and likely identity fraud under 2913, 49, given the fake ID used at 2 separate notary appointments, and possibly tampering with records under 2913, 42, given the missing original deed. She opened a formal case, number WPD 202401188. Here's where I want you to comment your city and local time again if you're still with me, because we are one scene away from the confrontation. And I want you to sit with this feeling for one more moment. As of April 8th, 2024, Melissa Renner believed she was 3 weeks away from closing on a $278,500 house sale, funded entirely by a forged signature and a fake ID, and she had absolutely no idea that a probate court, a police detective, 2 notaries, a title company, and her own sister had already built a case that would end that plan completely. And she still thought she was the only one who did anything for this family. On April 9th, David Okafor and I made a decision about how to handle the confrontation. We agreed I should not do it through an attorney's letter first, and not through the police showing up unannounced, both of which David said were legally sound but would likely destroy any remaining chance, however small, of Melissa cooperating, returning what she could, and avoiding the most severe end of the criminal exposure. Instead, I asked Melissa to meet me at Maple Crest Drive on April 13th, a Saturday at 1 p.m., framing it only as, "We need to go through Dad's things and talk about the house timeline." Detective Ionescu knew the meeting was happening. David knew. Nobody else did. I arrived at 12:40 p.m. and sat in my father's old recliner in the living room, with the binder closed on the coffee table in front of me, along with a manila folder containing certified copies of the 2 forged documents and Priya's notary journal excerpt. I did not lay them out dramatically. I just set the folder beside the closed binder and waited. Melissa arrived at 1:04 p.m., in a rush, talking before she'd even closed the door. Sorry, Sophie had a thing at school. Okay, so I actually wanted to talk to you about something anyway, because I've been meaning to bring this up. I found a really good agent, and I think honestly we should just move forward faster than the lawyer's been saying, because 6 more months of this house sitting empty is just bleeding money in taxes and insurance, and I don't think Dad would have wanted that. I let her finish completely. This is something I do at every closing. Let the person talk until they're done, because interrupting only gives them a reason to feel unheard later. Then I said calmly, "Melissa, sit down. I need to show you something." She sat, still half smiling, on the edge of the couch. I opened the folder first, not the binder, and slid across the certified copy of the power of attorney with the forged signature. "Do you recognize this document?" I asked. Her face didn't fall right away. That's something I want people to understand about real deception. It doesn't collapse instantly. It tries to hold. "That's the POA for the sale," she said. "You know about this?" "I do now," I said. "I didn't sign it, Melissa. I've never seen this document before 3 weeks ago. Someone forged my signature on it, and someone used a fake driver's license with my name on it to get it notarized on March 9th at a notary's office in Dublin." "That's—" she started and stopped. "Rachel, I don't know what you're talking about." "Diane Kessler called me on March 3rd, I said, keeping my voice level. "Because a woman came into her office claiming to be me, trying to get a quitclaim deed notarized, transferring the whole house to you. Diane got suspicious and called me instead of finishing the notarization. 6 days before that, on March 1st, someone ran a soft credit check on my social security number. On February 26th, someone applied for a $4,000 loan under my name, and it was denied. And on March 9th at Priya Annan's office, someone succeeded, got a power of attorney notarized with my forged signature, and used it to list this house and put it under contract with a couple named the Whitfields for $278,500, with a closing date of April 15th, 2 days from now." Melissa's composure cracked here, but not into an apology, into anger, which I want to note is a very common pattern in these confrontations. "You have no idea what it's like," she said, her voice rising, "trying to hold everything together while you just sit there being the perfect executor. The perfect notary, the perfect daughter who Dad always trusted more. You always think you're the only one who does anything for this family, Rachel. I have 2 kids. I have bills. I was drowning, and you were sitting on a house worth almost $300,000, splitting hairs about court paperwork for 6 more months while my landlord is threatening to evict us." I did not raise my voice. I want to be honest that a part of me wanted to. Instead, I said, "I understand you were drowning. I don't think that's a lie. But you forged my name and used a fake ID with my identity on it. That's not splitting hairs, Melissa. That's 2 felonies, minimum under Ohio law. And I have a fully documented case file with a Westerville detective already assigned to it." She went very still. "You went to the police?" "I went to the police on April 2nd, I said. Case number WPD 202401188, Detective Mara Ionescu. I also filed for a restraining order on the property with the probate court, which the judge granted on March 26th. There's no closing on April 15th, Melissa. There hasn't been one possible since March 26th. Heartland Title and Escrow has had a hold on the file for 3 weeks. The Whitfield's agent has already been notified there's a title issue. You did all this without telling me," she said, and her voice cracked into something closer to fear now than anger. "Yes," I said. "Because the moment I told you, you would have had time to destroy evidence, change your story, or try a third notary somewhere else. I didn't confront you until the fraud could no longer succeed, no matter what you did next. That was the point." She stood up, paced to the window, came back. "So what happens now? Are you actually going to let them arrest me, your own sister?" I said, I'm not deciding whether you get arrested. Detective Ionescu is building the criminal case independent of me. What I am deciding is whether I cooperate with a plea arrangement that keeps you out of prison, in exchange for full restitution and a formal renunciation of any further claim on the house, or whether I let this proceed as a fully contested criminal matter with no input from me at all. That's the actual choice in front of you right now. You'd send your own sister to prison over a house? She said, I'd let the legal system respond to forgery and identity theft the way it's designed to, I said. What I won't do is pretend it didn't happen because you're my sister. You didn't extend me that same courtesy on March 9th. There was a long silence. I remember the specific sound of the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen because it was the only sound in the house for almost 30 seconds. I didn't think you'd actually find out, she finally said quietly. I thought if it just happened quickly before probate dragged on, you'd be upset, but it would be done. And eventually you'd get over it because that's what you do. You get over things and you keep the family together. That admission, I didn't think you'd actually find out, was, in its own way, the most honest thing she said that entire afternoon, and it confirmed on record, with Detective Ionescu later reviewing my account of the conversation, that Melissa had known exactly what she was doing. I told her, still calmly, that I had a folder ready for Detective Ionescu documenting our conversation, and that I strongly recommended she call an attorney before speaking to anyone else about it, including me. I told her David Okafor could not represent her, since he represented the estate and, functionally, me as the wronged party. She asked, almost pleading now, is there any way to fix this without it going that far? I told her the truth. That depends on whether you're willing to cooperate fully. Return what you can, and accept that this will have real consequences. It's not going away, Melissa. But how bad it gets from here is partly still up to you. She left the house at 1:52 p.m. without saying goodbye. I sat in my father's recliner for another 20 minutes before I called Detective Ionescu to tell her the conversation was done, and largely matched what we'd anticipated. Over the following 3 weeks, the case moved forward exactly along the lines David had predicted. On April 22nd, Melissa retained a criminal defense attorney named Robert Feld, who reached out to David to discuss a negotiated resolution rather than a trial. On May 6th, Melissa agreed to a plea arrangement. She pled guilty to 1 count of forgery under Ohio Revised Code 2930-31, a 4th-degree felony, and 1 count of identity fraud under 2930-49, reduced through negotiation to a 1st-degree misdemeanor given the absence of completed financial loss, since the QuickBridge loan had been denied and the house sale had never closed. She received 3 years of community control, Ohio's version of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay $6,400 in restitution covering my legal fees with David Okafor, the cost of a credit monitoring service I'd been forced to enroll in for 2 years, and administrative fees to Heartland Title and Escrow for unwinding the fraudulent contract file. She also formally renounced, in writing, notarized properly this time by an independent notary neither of us knew, any claim to sole ownership of the Maple Crest Drive property, restoring the estate to the original 50-50th split under our father's actual will. The house itself was never sold to the Whitfields. Their agent, once informed of the fraud, withdrew the offer entirely on April 18th, which was, frankly, the responsible thing for them to do. Probate finally granted proper authority for a court-approved sale in September 2024. The house sold, legitimately, on October 3, 2024, for $291,000 to a different family, the Okonkwo's, and the proceeds were split evenly, $145,500 to me and $145,500 to Melissa, minus her $6,400 restitution obligation, which the court ordered paid first from her share of the proceeds, leaving her actual distribution at $139,100. Melissa lost more than money. She lost her real estate agent relationship since Kristen Pauley at Buckeye Realty Group dropped her as a client once the fraud became public record through the court filing. She lost a measure of standing with extended family. Our aunt, Carol's sister Linda, stopped speaking to her entirely after learning the details, though she remains in contact with me. Melissa's ex-husband Todd used the felony conviction, unsuccessfully, in a custody modification attempt that summer, which added legal costs on her side that had nothing to do with me directly, but were a consequence of the choice she made. As for us, Melissa and me, we are not estranged, but we are not what we were either. We text occasionally. She sent me a message on my birthday in June, which I answered. We have not had a full conversation about that April 13th meeting since it happened, and I don't know if we ever will. I told her in one of the only personal messages I sent after the plea was finalized that I was open to rebuilding trust slowly, on the condition that it started with total transparency, always, no matter how small the issue. She said she understood. I don't know yet if she does. I've learned not to need to know that in advance. What I keep coming back to, almost a year later, is this. My sister spent 30 years believing that being clever and desperate enough would always let her get away with taking what wasn't hers, because it had worked when she was 9 years old with $11 from a purse. What she never accounted for was that the sister she'd learned to talk her way past was also the sister who'd spent 11 years learning exactly how forged signatures fail, exactly how fraud gets documented, and exactly how patience beats panic every single time. She thought quiet meant unaware. It just meant I was building the file before I said a word. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that you don't have to match someone's volume to win. The people who did the most damage in my life were always the loudest in the room. The people who actually protected me, Diane, Priya, David, Detective Ionescu, did their most important work quietly, on paper, before anyone else even knew there was a problem to solve. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment telling me what part hit hardest. I read all of them, and I'll see you in the next one.